The morning the FBI came to my farm, even the horses seemed to sense something was wrong. I was out near the south fence line, halfway through a repair job, boots sunk in mud and fencing pliers in my hand, when I heard engines coming up the gravel road. At first, I figured it was a delivery truck or maybe someone lost and looking for directions. But then I looked up and saw 3 black SUVs rolling slowly toward my front gate in a straight line like they already knew exactly where they were headed. Dust kicked up behind them. My dog started barking before the vehicles even stopped. By the time I pulled off my gloves, 2 federal agents were already stepping out, jackets zipped, badges visible, calm faces, the kind of people who don't rush because they expect everyone else to do that for them. And standing just behind them, arms crossed, wearing that self-satisfied smile I had come to know too well, was Karen, the president of the HOA from the subdivision across the ridge. That was the moment I knew this had gone way beyond the usual nonsense. This wasn't another complaint about my tractor being visible from the road. It wasn't one more letter whining about my trailers, my feed bins, my fencing, or the fact that a working farm didn't match the polished fantasy of the neighborhood she ran like her own little kingdom. No, Karen had gone bigger this time. She had taken her obsession with my land and pushed it all the way to the federal level. One of the agents asked my name. Another was already scanning past me, looking toward the equipment barn, the silos, and the old storage building near the tree line. Before I could answer properly, Karen jumped in. She started pointing, talking fast, throwing out words like illegal land use, restricted activity, suspicious storage, blocked access, and public safety concern like she had practiced the speech in front of a mirror all week. She thought this was the moment I was finally going to crack. She thought if she made the situation sound serious enough, official enough, dramatic enough, I'd panic right there at my own gate. But Karen didn't know one very important thing. My family had paperwork on that land going back decades, long before her subdivision existed, long before her HOA board started printing rules on expensive letterhead and acting like they owned the world around them. And before those agents were done with my property, one of them was going to learn exactly whose ground they were standing on. My name is Daniel Mercer. If you had seen me that morning, standing there in muddy boots with a fencing tool in one hand and 3 federal vehicles at my gate, you probably would have assumed I was about to get buried under paperwork. That's exactly what Karen assumed too. What she never understood was that my farm was not some empty patch of land sitting next to her subdivision waiting to be pushed around. It wasn't forgotten land, it wasn't unclaimed space, and it definitely wasn't hers to control. This place had history. My father bought the first connected parcel here back in 1987, when most of this county was still dirt roads, paddle fences, and handshake agreements written down by people who actually knew the land they were talking about. Over the years, my family kept adding to it piece by piece, buying, leasing, restoring, and protecting the surrounding parcels until our name was tied to more county filings, tax records, easements, and boundary maps than most people would ever imagine. We didn't own influence in the flashy country club way some folks brag about. We had something stronger. We had history, records, and a paper trail that outlived election cycles, county staff changes, and every overconfident HOA president who thought a clipboard made her powerful. That gate the agents were standing in front of, my father installed it himself. The barn Karen liked calling suspicious storage, my uncle helped build it before her neighborhood even had utility lines. And the road she kept trying to describe as some kind of shared community approach, that road was on county plats long before her subdivision even had a name. I'm not a loud man, never have been. I don't win arguments by shouting people down. I win them by knowing exactly what belongs to me, exactly where the lines are, and exactly which records still matter when the noise finally dies. And Karen had just made the mistake of trying to bluff her way through the worst possible property she could have picked, because the moment she started acting like my farm fell under HOA authority, she stopped picking a fight with just me. She picked a fight with the history of the land itself. My trouble with Karen had started months earlier. The first time I saw her, she was standing by my north fence in a white blazer and sunglasses, holding a clipboard like it gave her legal authority. She introduced herself as president of the HOA from the new subdivision across the ridge and started talking to me as if we were already part of the same system. According to her, my tractor shed was an eyesore. My feed bins could be seen from some of the upper lots. My fencing looked uneven. My work trailers were hurting neighborhood appeal. Then she looked over at my cattle and asked how long I planned to keep livestock that close to residential property values. I remember just staring at her for a second, because that's the thing about people like Karen. They buy houses next to a working farm and then act offended when the farm behaves like a farm. At first, I kept it polite. I told her the truth. My property was not part of her HOA, never had been. It sat outside her plat, outside her authority, outside every decorative rule her board loved sending out in letterhead. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it only encouraged her. Within 2 weeks, I got the first letter. It wasn't legally binding. It was just one of those puffed-up notices full of bold text and fake urgency. She claimed my equipment placement was affecting the subdivision's appearance. Then came another letter about road use. Then another about drainage. Then another saying that because emergency services sometimes used the wider county approach during storms, the HOA had a community safety interest in how my land was maintained. That phrase stuck with me. Community safety interest.
That's the kind of language people use when they're testing how far a lie can travel before someone stops it. After that, Karen started showing up more often. She would drive slowly along the outer road, stop near the fence, take photos, and leave before I could get to her. One time, she came with 2 board members and stood near the gate measuring a strip of land like they were preparing to claim it. Another time, one of my workers caught her pointing toward my equipment shed while talking to a contractor tied to the subdivision. She wasn't just complaining anymore. She was building a story. And if she had stopped at fake notices and gossip, I would have handled it the normal way. One lawyer's letter, one boundary packet, one formal warning to stay off my land. But Karen had a special talent for confusing confidence with authority. So instead of backing off when she realized my farm wasn't hers to control, she made the call that turned her little HOA crusade into a federal embarrassment. About 10 minutes after the agent stepped through my gate, I found out exactly what she had told them. The senior agent stayed professional, calm voice, neutral face. He said they were there to review a complaint involving possible misuse of agricultural land, unregistered storage activity, blocked access routes, and possible concealment of materials serious enough to justify federal attention. He delivered it in that flat, careful tone professionals use when they don't want to reveal what they're thinking. But the second he finished, Karen lifted her chin like she was waiting to watch me fall apart. That was her second mistake, because guilty people panic when they hear language like that. I didn't panic. I asked one question. Which part of my property did she tell you to look at first? Karen's face changed for half a second, just enough for me to know she had arrived with a target already chosen. This wasn't confusion, this wasn't concern, this was a rehearsed accusation. She pointed toward the old storage building near the tree line and started talking again, louder this time, more dramatic. She claimed trucks came in at odd hours. She claimed I had blocked access routes. She claimed some fuel tanks weren't documented. Then she pushed even harder and suggested that parts of my back acreage might fall under protected review tied to older development classifications. I'll give her this much. It almost sounded believable, but only if you knew the land. What Karen had done was mix public phrases, half-understood property terms, and county planning language into one dramatic little package meant to sound dangerous to outsiders. To someone unfamiliar with the area, it might have sounded serious. To me, it sounded like somebody had spent a week reading records she didn't understand. So I unlocked the gate and invited the agents in. Not because I was worried, because I wanted them to see everything. The barns, the tags on the tanks, the posted access markers, the equipment records, the feed logs, the maintenance paperwork, every dull, legal, documented inch of that farm. Karen was expecting resistance. Instead, she got a guided tour. As we walked, the agents asked careful questions. I answered every one of them directly. No attitude, No stalling, no speech, just facts. What was each building used for? Which road was county listed? Which parcels had been surveyed together? What had been rebuilt, added later, or grandfathered in under older approvals? By the time we reached the equipment shed, Karen had stopped smiling. Then the senior agent looked toward the fence line and asked the question that changed the whole direction of that morning. "Mr. Mercer, who held the original controlling parcels in this corridor before the subdivision was recorded?" I answered without hesitation. "My family did." Not as a threat, not with attitude, just the truth. And that was the moment Karen finally realized she may have brought the wrong people to the wrong farm. I explained that my farm wasn't some separate patch sitting beside her neighborhood. It was part of a much older chain of parcels my family had controlled since 1987. Land tied to access roads, drainage routes, utility easements, and old boundary filings that existed long before her HOA board ever met in a clubhouse conference room. The subdivision was new.
Our paper trail was not. One of the agents asked if I had documentation. I almost laughed. I told him I could show him the short version from my office or the long version from the county archive if he wanted to spend the whole afternoon learning how this corridor had been assembled over 40 years. He said the short version would do. So I took them into the farmhouse office and pulled out the folder I kept for exactly this kind of person. Not federal agents necessarily, more for people who thought confidence mattered more than records. Inside were certified surveys, parcel maps, tax summaries, access agreements, easement references, and dated boundary documents linking my father's first purchase in 1987 to the surrounding land my family added over time. Karen went quiet. That was new. The senior agent looked through the papers for less than a minute before asking whether the subdivision's access and drainage assumptions had ever conflicted with the older filings. Now that question mattered, because the answer was yes. Not in a dramatic courtroom sense, not in some big public fight, but county staff had flagged overlaps more than once between the subdivision's newer language and the older agricultural records tied to our land. Nothing explosive, just enough to make one thing crystal clear. Karen had no business pretending my property fit neatly inside her little HOA world. Then I gave them the real twist. The road her HOA kept calling shared community access, not theirs. The drainage strip she kept mentioning, also not theirs. And the back section she described like some suspicious corridor, that sat within a chain of legacy filings tied to my family's land control, not her board's authority. That's when the energy changed. The agents were no longer looking at my barns and fence lines like possible evidence. They were looking at Karen. Not dramatically, not with raised voices, just with that quiet stillness that tells you professionals are reassessing the person who brought them there in the first place. Karen tried to recover, said she was only reporting what she believed to be irregular. But belief was not going to save her now. Not after the records, not after the way she had described the land, not after dragging federal attention onto property with a cleaner paper trail than her HOA had probably ever seen. Then, because panic had started setting in, she made it worse. She started talking faster, said she had emails from concerned residents, claimed multiple neighbors had noticed strange activity, said the board had reason to believe my operations were affecting access, runoff, and property values. Then she said the line that finished her. She claimed she had been given to understand that parts of my land were under subdivision oversight. That phrase is poison when documents exist, because it usually means one of two things. Either you never verified what you were saying, or you did verify it and lied anyway. I didn't interrupt her. I let her keep talking. One agent started taking notes. Another asked where exactly she got that information. Karen began listing half sources, things she heard at a board meeting, something a planning clerk supposedly mentioned, an old development packet, a resident who knew somebody at the county office. None of it sounded solid. None of it sounded official. And the more she tried to patch the holes, the worse it got. Then the senior agent asked whether she had ever entered my property, measured anything near my gate, or coordinated with others to inspect land she had no authority over. Karen hesitated, only for a second, but that second was enough. Because now this was no longer about my farm. Now it was about her conduct. That's when I added the part I had been holding. I told the agents I had camera footage from the North Boundary Road, time-stamped photos of Karen and board members near my markers, and written statements from workers who had seen her directing people along my outer access line while building her complaint. I also had copies of every notice she sent, including the ones where she repeatedly described my property as if it fell under HOA control, which had never applied to my land at all. The silence after that hit harder than shouting ever could. Karen crossed her arms again, but this time it wasn't confidence. It was defense. The senior agent asked if I could bring out the footage and notice packet. I had both in less than 2 minutes. Camera stills, dates, timestamps, photos of Karen outside my fence with board members, copies of her letters, and most damaging of all, one printed page from her own notice where she described my farm as subject to community enforcement language that had never applied to my land at all. She saw it the moment I handed it over.
And for the first time all morning, Karen looked scared. Not annoyed, not offended, scared. One agent read through the notice packet while another compared the wording in her complaint to the parcel records I had already shown him. They didn't yell, they didn't need to. Professionals don't need drama when the paperwork already tells the story. Then the senior agent asked her one direct question. Did you personally verify any of these jurisdiction claims before making a federal report? Karen tried to answer in circles, said she acted out of concern, said residents were worried, said she believed there could be violations serious enough to justify outside attention. Then she made the final mistake. She blamed the county, said someone there had basically confirmed she was right. The agent asked for a name. She didn't have one. Asked for an email. She didn't have one. Asked for any written determination, map note, or formal notice tying my farm to subdivision authority. She had nothing. By then, even the board members who had shown up behind her looked like they wanted to melt into the gravel road. One quietly stepped back toward his truck. Another stopped looking anyone in the eye. That was when I gave them the last piece. I told the agents Karen had already been warned more than once that my land was outside HOA control, that she had kept issuing notices anyway, and that after failing to push me around locally, she had escalated into federal accusations built on terms she clearly did not understand. I didn't say it angrily. I didn't need to. By then, the pattern was obvious. She hadn't discovered a threat on my farm. She had weaponized authority because she couldn't control property that was never hers in the first place. The senior agent closed the folder, looked at Karen, and said they would be documenting the mismatch between her complaint and the verified land records. Then he added one more line. He said knowingly false or materially misleading statements used to trigger official action could carry consequences far beyond a simple HOA dispute. That hit her harder than anything else. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. For the first time since I had known her, Karen had no prepared speech, no clipboard posture, no smug smile, no performance, just silence. She left my gate without another word. After that, the whole board started scrambling. Calls were made, emails flew around. People who had stood behind her when she thought she was winning suddenly started saying they were never fully informed. Funny how fast people remember caution when the paperwork comes out. Within a week, the HOA stopped sending notices to my address. Within 2 weeks, neighbors who used to slow down and stare at my fence line started waving again. And within a month, Karen was no longer carrying herself like the ruler of that subdivision. Turns out it's hard to act like the queen of the neighborhood after bringing federal agents to a farm you never had authority over, only to expose your own ignorance in front of them. I didn't celebrate, didn't need to.
Land teaches patience better than pride ever will. My father used to say paper outlasts noise. That morning proved he was right. Karen had titles, opinions, and a board full of people who confused confidence with control. I had deeds, plats, history, and the truth. And in the end, that was enough. Because this was never really about one complaint. It was about what happens when people mistake proximity for power. They build homes near old land, see fences they didn't build, barns older than their bylaws, and roads they never laid down themselves, and somehow convince themselves that being nearby means being in charge. But history doesn't bend just because someone prints new rules on clean stationery. Karen thought one call to the FBI would make me look small. What it actually did was remind everyone in that county whose records were there first. And around here, that still matters.